Hey, it's Sila Social Studies. Okay, guys, in this last installment of Westward Expansion, for the chapter, we're going to talk about the life on the plains. So let's go where are we talking about here? This is where we're talking about the Great Plains area, right in between the Rocky Mountains and the Mississippi River. And who are we talking about? We're talking about people like this family right here. Look, they made houses made of sod because there are a few trees and lumber on the plains. So let's talk about getting the people out there. How did the United States get the people out to the Great Plains? Well, the United States government created two land grant acts that helped open the West to settlers in 1862. The first one, the Homestead Act, gave 160 acres of government land to farmers to live on free of charge, and the only thing that was required was to build a house on the land and farm it. Pretty simple. So now Americans from every wealth bracket were able to move to the West and acquire land to live on and build a house and farm. Now, there was so much land out in the West that the Homestead Act gave away free farming land until the 1980s. But think about this for a second. You got land, build a house on it and farm, and it's free of charge. You're good to go. Now, remember how the government got this land from Native Americans, right? That's who was living on the land. Unfair treaties that were renegotiated, canceled, or taken by government or army force. So the other act that would open and control lands out west was what we call the Morrill Act. And the Morrill Act gave federal land to the states to sell that land in order to fund colleges to teach agriculture and engineering. So because so many Americans from every wealth bracket and education bracket moved to the West because of these grants, some of these settlers still needed to learn how to farm to keep their land, right? So that's what the Morrill Act was for. Teach these people how to farm on that land. So the result of these two acts was the migration of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of settlers, like women, immigrants, and African Americans to the Midwest. Thousands of Southern African Americans, known as Sodbusters, moved to Kansas. Women were an important force in settling the frontier as well, and women like Annie Bidwell, who was a founder of Chico, California, she supported many social causes. Harsh life on the remote farms led farmers to form communities, creating churches and schools, with many of the children helping on the farm with all of the chores. Children needed the summers off to be able to farm. So the Great Plains area has a type of grassland that is different than on the East Coast here. People who were farmers that broke up this tough, thick grass on the plains earned the farmers the nickname Sodbusters. And because of this hard landscape, mechanical farming became the common thing of the 1880s and the 1890s. And farmers began to dry farm, which was resulted in hardy crops such as red wheat. And they would take these crops and they would harvest them and ship them east by train and then overseas. And the abundance of grains grown in this area of the United States, the Great Plains, resulted in the Great Plains actually being nicknamed the breadbasket of the world. So between 1860 and 1900, the United States population more than doubled because the amount of land given away by the federal government, the number of farms, tripled. And with the help of the Industrial Revolution and the improvements to the mechanical reaper, farmers could harvest a bushel of wheat 20 times faster in 1900 than they could by hand or with early mechanical reapers in the 1830s. So the faster processing of wheat led to a problem with the farms on the plains. More farms and greater productivity led to overproduction, which led to lower prices. Farm incomes fell and many farmers lost their farms, homes, and became tenant farmers. So by 1880, about 25%, or 1 out of 4 farmers, were rented by tenants, or 1 out of 4 farmers were tenants. They were renting that land. It's all about supply and demand. If you have a low supply and a high demand, your wheat is going to be worth a lot of money. But if you harvest all this wheat and you have a gigantic supply of wheat and the demand falls, your wheat will go to waste. It will rot, it will go to waste, and it will cause the price of wheat to fall so much that the farmers can't make any money. So here's like a little example. So you have not much wheat with demand, the market price is stable, the farmers can still make a lot of money, right? But when you get, farmers are happy, yay, dollar signs and happy faces. And when the farmers are poor, when they harvest so much wheat and the demand does not go up, so they have a lot of wheat, no demand, and you have an unhappy farmer. So farmers formed associations to protect their interests. Associations like the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry was a social and educational organization for farmers. The Grange called for laws to regulate railroad rates. During the late 1880s, the railroad was the only available option for farmers to transport their grains to the east or west coast. Unfortunately for the farmers, the railroad had a monopoly in transporting the grain, and the railroad system could set the prices on transporting grain no matter how high. So you'd have all these farmers that were harvesting all their grain, and the only way that they can get it shipped anywhere in the United States is on the railroad. And the railroad was a monopoly, which means there was no more competition to be able to ship this grain. So they were able to set the price at whatever they wanted, angering farmers. And because of this, the Supreme Court ruled in 1877 that the government could regulate railroads. However, in 1886, the government was like, nah, I can't regulate railroads, but I can regulate companies doing business across state lines. And this clash between the federal government and the railroad would erupt over regulation for years to come. And in 1887, Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Act to provide national regulations for trade, but they still weren't able to enforce them. Brings us to the free silver debate and William Jennings Bryan. The United States had been on the gold standard since 1873, resulting in deflation. And because of this, many farmers supported the unlimited coining of silver and the backing of paper currency with silver. And in 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act to increase the amount of silver purchased for coinage, but it didn't help farmers much. So in response, in 1892, the Farmers Alliance formed the Populist Party to have power, and they picked a candidate to represent them. And the Populist Party supported the ownership of the railroads and communication systems as well. They supported freed silver and labor regulations. And to help bring this to power and to help bring this into the influence of the party, it did support William Jennings Bryan as a Democrat in the election of 1896. Bryan was a politician from Nebraska, and he supported the silver coinage. He was an influential speaker, but he was defeated, and his defeat marked the end of the Farmers Alliance and the Populist Party. So it was at the end. The Farmers Alliance are done. The Populist Party is done. The railroad is pretty much in control of everything. The government really can't do much. Is there even any more land to claim? Well, by the 1870s, only a small portion of the Great Plains remained unsettled. Remember that territory where Native Americans were forced to move? Well, U.S. officials allowed homesteaders to settle in the Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma in 1889. Settlers claimed more than 11 million acres of former Indian land in the Oklahoma land rush. Was that the end? Frederick Jackson Turner was a historian, and he argued in his Frontier thesis that the frontier has ceased to exist in the United States by the early 1890s. So here's your picture. Migration in 1850, not so much. You have the gold rush, some people out in Oregon, and by 1890, you have all these people moving out west.